Good morning, my friends. We are doing this wonderful series, which we're now calling Live Like Yogananda. And it's from chapter 17 of Swami's biography of Master. It's called Yogananda's Salient Characteristics. There are 32 of them, and we're up to number 3. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all of you. Inspire us with your wonderful presence. Show us the way to live in this world in harmony with your will. Teach us that the ways of goodness and light will bring us every fulfillment that we long for. Give us the strength when tempted to take a shorter, more self-gratifying approach, to hold strong to our principles until we come home to thee. Hatu, peace, amen. I felt it coming and thought, Lord, please let me finish. But not quite. Give me a moment here. It's cloudy and cold and rainy where I live in Palo Alto, but it's still spring, and so I keep sneezing, and that's just the way it's going to be. Fortunately, it's not really terrible. I had a profound disappointment this morning that I have to tell you about. The first strawberry, which was perfect. And I thought to go out and get it last night. But foolishly, I let Tamo Guna rule me, and I didn't go out and get it. And of course, in the night, some creature, probably the little possum, who wanders about doing things in the evenings, took it. So I was disappointed, but somebody got it. And perhaps it was a two-legged person, I don't know. But it was beautiful. And there has brothers and sisters, though. But now I won't hesitate in the night. I'm being frivolous and funny because here's number 3, salient quality of Master. Now bear in mind, no ego. What was the one yesterday? Deep impersonal respect for people. And this one is, Master had an impish and utterly delightful sense of humor. So it's very interesting, not only, of course, that Swami mentions it, but that it comes very early in the conversation. And many, many times when Swami talked about Master, he talked about how humorous he was and how much they laughed. It was really a salient characteristic. And it's very important, so let's go on with this. Master had an impish and utterly delightful sense of humor. This trait may be seen in some of the jokes he told, many of which he'd heard from others. So now we're going to hear a few jokes that Master particularly liked. One was a somewhat left-handed compliment, which he told with a childlike smile. Your teeth are like stars, they come out at night. Then, let's see. Another was of 3 men, an Irishman, an Englishman, and a Scotsman. All 3 were drinking whiskey when a fly landed in each of their glasses. The Irishman simply sloshed his glass sideways, losing a fair amount of whiskey along with the fly. The Englishman carefully flicked the fly out of the glass, but the Scotsman squeezed the fly. He'd soaked up some of the whiskey and he wanted it back. I still remember vividly the little touch of glee with which Master uttered that word, squeezed. In still another joke, 3 Scotsmen attended church. As the collection plate was approaching them, one of them fainted, and the other 2 carried him out. I'm sure he would have greatly enjoyed this one too, though I confess I'm not sure he heard it. An Irish woman was coming through U.S. Customs carrying a suspicious-looking bottle. "What's this?" cried the customs inspector. "Oh, sir, it's only holy water." The official opened the bottle and sniffed its contents. "Aha!" he cried, "as I suspected, Irish whiskey." The nun cried, "Glory be to God, it's a miracle." Oh dear. In dictating his Bhagavad Gita commentaries, the master gave the advice to eat only a little bit, but frequently. Stokam stokam anakoda. Sanskrit scholars, please forgive me if I have that wrong. This is how I remember those foreign-sounding words he pronounced. Dorothy Taylor, his secretary, mistyped the phrase to read stonum a little bit frequently. This was too delicious for Master not to quote to me with a heavy chuckle, with a hearty chuckle. Finally, because I could go on indefinitely in this vein, Swami says, I recall how he once came into the monks' dining room between meals and found it an embarrassingly utter mess. All he did is say with a smile, "Well, it might be worse." So much for certain disciples' description of him as a stern, even scowling disciplinarian. Okay, so sense of humor. You know, it's interesting and it's obvious, and I repeat it, it's obvious if you're listening because it's just clear. Just give me a moment. I said to Swamiji at one point, I said, the way you behave is the way you behave is modeled on the way Master behaved, isn't it? And he said, of course. And I said, and those things that you refrain from doing or sort of leave out of your expression is because that was the way Master was. Is that so? Again, Swami said, of course. Now, he didn't assume a Bengali accent or anything like that, but he saw Master's salient characteristics and realized that those characteristics were not incidental. They were the human expression of the divine consciousness that he had. And we can't get realization merely by pretending. But we can attune ourselves to what that state of realization is. I guess the word would be by emulating, by imitating, and even far more importantly, by meditating on what the underlying consciousness is that ends up manifesting in this way. Because not everybody is clever, not everybody is a good storyteller, not everybody is good at witty repartee. Those are superficial qualities. But the ability to appreciate and to just be able to let go of serious concerns long enough to just enjoy the human comedy. It's interesting that Master enjoyed jokes that took stereotype characteristics. I mean, two of those jokes that he talked about, and the third one that Swami added, were about Irish and Scotsmen and English people. So we're talking about national characteristics. Nowadays, we're supposed to pretend on certain levels. You know, it's become very problematic to be able to just make self-evident statements about human nature and then just enjoy it. I think that we're in a corrective phase in which things have been pushed a little too far. I'm going to just let them be pushed a little too far and assume once the real issues are settled, then there'll be a greater relaxation about many other things. But I'm going to leave that for the moment. Because what Master was simply doing is that there's always a light side. Every situation in life has a light side. And let me just say other things about this. I was realizing, and I might have discussed in one of these morning satsangs, when you really let go and laugh, you are completely in the moment. The ability to laugh is that something has happened, it's triggered this amazing and interesting response in us where we just sort of let go. A laugh just sort of comes out of you. It's not premeditated, it's not calculated, I mean a genuine laugh. It's a spontaneous reaction to what you've heard or what you've seen or what you've thought in that moment. There's no past and there's no future. And there's also a sense of just total relaxation. There was a man named Norman Cousins, I believe his name was, who had a serious, some kind of a degenerative disease. And the doctors didn't really know what they could do for him. And he took on a course of laughter therapy. And he got the funniest films and the funniest stories that he knew. And part of his treatment was that he spent time enjoying humor and laughing every day, and he recovered his health. And he felt that that laughter every day was a key part of it, because it exercises the body, and it totally relieves the mind. Isn't that how you feel after laughing? I was remembering, I used to take these 2 or 3 week lecture tours, and I was up in Seattle, Washington for one of them, and it was 3 weeks, and I was adept at what I was doing. The way Swami put it about some of the work that he did, he said, it wasn't hard, but it took a lot of energy. So for me to do a 3 week lecture tour, it wasn't hard in the sense it wasn't arduous and it wasn't painful, but it took a lot of energy. And by the time it was over, I was done. And I stayed during a certain cycle of that time. I stayed with Balaram and Sitabai. That was before any of their 4 sons were born. And it was just us, and I would usually have traveling companions with me, musicians and others who would help me. And I remember at the end of every lecture tour, there would just be a point when things would just start striking me, especially, but all of us, as just very, very funny. And it was just the need to sort of release all of the experience, all of the intensity, all of the concentration and energy that was required to make it happen. It would get released in laughter. And Balaram was a very good cook, and he made for me something I'd never had before, or never even heard of before, which was the eggplant dish called baba ganoush, which is, it's just not English. It's a perfectly reasonable language. I don't know what language it is, whether it's Turkish or where the word comes from. In English, it's a slightly funny sound. And I remember the word baba ganoush absolutely just put me into hysterical laughter. And all the possible meanings of it and all the iterations. I literally remember sliding to the floor because I was laughing so hard at nothing more than the word baba ganoush. And for years afterwards in our friendship, all one had to say was baba ganoush among us, and the 3 of us would go to pieces, especially me, because it just, laughter lets go. So master creating a personality in which an impish sense of humor, as Swami puts it, was a central role. He did it on purpose. He was trying to show us, this world is, the masters refer to this world as an ocean of suffering. Get away from my ocean of suffering. That's what Krishna says, which seems slightly incompatible with a sense of humor, doesn't it? And then some people actually think that because there is so much suffering in this world, that we're not allowed to laugh. But it's just the opposite. Without the ability to just, as when I asked Swamiji once, what is a sense of humor? Because in a certain context, he just asked me a simple question. We were standing on the balcony of this condominium in Hawaii when he was working on the path. And we could see the swimming pool, because we were on the 3rd or 4th floor. We could see the swimming pool, and right by it was the ocean. And the ocean has the waves, naturally, and the swimming pool seemed to have waves, and there was all this white foam on the swimming pool. And Swami asked, what's that? Pointing to the white foam. We're just having a conversation. I said, whitecaps. The concept that this tiny little condominium swimming pool would have enough of a tide, to have whitecaps was completely ridiculous. But what was so interesting to me was there wasn't a second's hesitation between his question and my answer. And we both laughed for some reason. It's not a particularly good joke, but in the moment we thought it was very funny. And I asked Swami afterwards, I said, what is that? What causes that, like a witticism, to respond to a perfectly rational question? Why did I respond with a joke? And Swami's answer was profound, really. And I've always remembered. To a certain extent, he said, kindly humor, not mean humor, but kindly humor is a spiritual quality because it indicates sufficient flexibility of perspective that you can just step just aside, just enough from the way things appear to imagine a completely alternate reality. And kindly humor is always an alternate reality that brings joy to people, brings them into the moment, causes us to laugh, makes us forget our troubles, and eases the stress, which has a physical component and can even make us healthy. Master actually said his recipe for healthy living is to read one funny story every day. And Swamiji trained us in that. He often, especially in the early years, he often gathered us together for no more exalted purpose than that he would read us a P.G. Wodehouse story. All of us, I say, grew up. We grew up on listening to Swami read P.G. Wodehouse, which I'd never known anything about him. He's an English humorist. Swami was introduced to him when he was a schoolboy. And he has this always kindly but completely zany world that he presents. And he's a masterful writer, and he does it perfectly. And Swami would read these stories to us, and he would do all the accents because he lived in England. He knew all the British accents and the British characters, and he was just marvelous with that. On various places on the internet you can find it. For a period of time, Swami started making a commercial product out of reading these P.G. Wodehouse stories, and he got a testimonial from some completely unknown person who had no relationship to Ananda or to Master's teachings. Swami probably did those. Of course, he did those recordings as J. Donald Walters. And he was already not a young man when he was doing them. And I believe that there was a video of him reading. So the person who got this knew that Swami was somewhat older. And this video came, and it was sort of like, this testimonial came, and it wasn't just to Swami, it was to whom it may concern. And she wrote with great enthusiasm about how marvelous these stories were. And she was a lifelong devotee of Wodehouse, and she'd never heard them read so well. And she understands that Mr. Walters is somewhat elderly and not in the best of health. But as long as he is capable of holding his book in his hand, she wrote, prop him in the corner and put a microphone in front of him. And Swami just so enjoyed that. It's like, and then he laughed too, of all the work he'd done for Master, that maybe his true legacy was going to be these recordings of P.G. Wodehouse stories. And on a very deep level, that pleased him, because bringing joy. Master has in Whispers from Eternity, he has, and I don't know where it is, but it's somewhere in there, but it has a phrase that I remember as, if you have a tiny bubble of joy, and then there's an interesting qualifying clause there, no matter what causes it. He said, expand it and expand it, puff it up, blow, whatever brings you joy. Just keep expanding it and keep expanding it until it becomes infinite. Start wherever you're standing. And then from there, you can always get there from here. It's sort of a joke, no, you can't get there from here. No, you can always get there from here, whatever that is. Now, I want to just put a slight condition on this. Master had an impish sense of humor. Elsewhere, Swami says, but when Master wanted to be serious, no power on earth could move him away from that. So it wasn't that Master was light-minded. And it wasn't at all that Master used humor to cover things he didn't want to face or distract people from situations that made Master uncomfortable. Sometimes people will do that. They just, every time things get too self-revealing or too challenging, they'll try to throw up humor to avoid having to really confront and experience realities that they are trying to run away from. And Master criticized one of the disciples because he said he always was joking and laughing. And he said he keeps the other monks distracted. And Master did not commend him for his sense of humor because it had an impure motivation. It did not come from an integrated, relaxed ability to see life from many perspectives. It came from a compulsive need to avoid. And so we have to keep our sense of humor in right proportion. There have been a number of occasions when I have said something to Swami that I intended to be humorous, but he knew that I was using humor to deflect, or that the source of that humor was something that was not funny, that I was not free from, and that my attempt to laugh it off was not timely. With Swamiji, I was thinking about this, because he had many very, very difficult things to face. But he knew when to be serious about them. And then he knew when to be humorous. One of my absolute favorite times that he used humor to perfection was when we were on practically the worst day of the lawsuit that was trying to assassinate his character. Swami had to testify in court. Most of us were on the witness list and therefore couldn't be in court with him. And the opposing attorney was just horrible, and we just knew it was going to be an awful day. So there were about 25 of us just in the hallway. We couldn't be in the courtroom. The thing went on for several hours, and it was a terrible day. And when Swami finally exited from the courtroom after 3 hours of testimony, which was pretty much as bad as, as it could be, he came out, we swarmed around him. We were just so upset about all that was going on. And I've shared this story with you. This is based on James Bond, because in those days Swami enjoyed the James Bond movies. I haven't seen them in a long time. I suspect, like everything else, they've gotten more graphically violent, more explicitly sexual. At the time that we were enjoying them, they were more innocent. They were just more ludicrous and not serious. But among the many qualities of James Bond was that he was very, very specific about his martini. And he always wanted it to be stirred, not shaken. So when anyone would ask him what drink he would want, he would say a martini, but stirred, not shaken. So Swami comes out of this, and we're just hovering around, how are you? What happened? Is it okay? And Swami said, I am stirred, but not shaken. Just like that. That was his answer. The whole future of Ananda was on the line. We had been in this lawsuit. By that point, we'd been in it 8 years. We were millions of dollars into it. We were being vilified in the newspaper. It was just a nightmare. And we're all there. And Swami says, stirred, but not shaken. And we just laughed and laughed. And it's like all the tension, not just even of that morning, but of all those years, it was just like, yes, we are stirred, but we are not shaken. I mean, it was joking right on the point. And then he said, where shall we go for lunch? And, later he talked seriously. Later he talked about the experience in a quieter, more focused way. He never brushed it off, because it was real. It was very real. And Swami's the willpower and energy it took from Swamiji to be able to rise to that moment, among other things. But it was real, and he wanted us to also see the effort. Because otherwise what happens is, if you only see the result of that effort, and the individual never shares the effort, then when I confront something that is my particular Armageddon, or whatever you want to call it in that moment, and all I've ever seen is the result, and I realize that there's going to be that I need a tremendous effort, I don't know what to do. I have a very unclear picture of the spiritual path. So humor used correctly has a tremendous effect on showing us how to behave properly, but it cannot be a shield. And when you think about it, when you pay attention to yourself, when you pay attention to people around you, you'll be able to see what the difference is. Swami, when Swami would laugh, it's like a classic belly laugh. And this is how he talked about Master. He just talked about Master's willingness to just enjoy, to just let go and enjoy. It was based on the fact that because Master could choose whatever was appropriate for the moment. And the word is, and this is how I often think about myself when I think about future lives. I don't really care, what circumstances I'm in, what my life is like, these different, I do care, of course, in the sense I'm not that free. I don't want to say it that way. But when I look at the life I've lived so far, what I don't want to be is compelled. I want to have the freedom to go with what God gives me and not feel compelled by forces inner realities, let me say it, unresolved inner realities, unconfronted inner realities. I can say, this is my limit, this is what I have to do, but I want to move consciously. I want to be able to say, this is my choice. But what Master did is he could choose whatever was appropriate. Just whatever was needed in the moment that would express Divine Mother's bliss. And think about this, and I want to close with this one because this is so amazing. There is the poem Samadhi. Vanished the veils of light and shade, lifted every vapor of sorrow, sailed away all dawns of fleeting joy, gone the dim sensory mirage, love, hate, health, disease, life, death, perish these false shadows on the screen of duality. Then the poem goes on for many more verses, and it talks about waves of laughter, scythes of sarcasm, X-ray floods, cataclysmic events, everything is swallowed and consumed in the divine. It's a magnificent poem. It goes all the way into the realms that we can just barely imagine. Master told us to memorize it and to say it every day. And the whole poem just crests in a way that you can hardly believe when you repeat it often and you begin to think about it. Thou art I am thou, knowing, knower, known as one, smoldering joy off-puffed by meditation, blinding my tearful eyes, burst into immortal flames of bliss, consumed my tears, my frame, my all. The last lines of that poem, a tiny bubble of laughter. I am become the sea of mirth itself. Wow. So an impish sense of humor, that's where it all comes to. I become a tiny bubble of laughter, but kindly, free, appropriately chosen. Just understanding that we live in a sea of mirth. Mirth would be the natural result of joy, isn't it? Just an uncontainable inner bliss would naturally express itself as just a willingness to forget everything, in the laughter of the moment. And this, Swami tells us, was a characteristic quality of Master. Swami said, sometimes Master would anticipate the punchline and begin to laugh before the punchline would come. And he had a fairly thick Bengali accent, if you've listened to his voice. Swami said sometimes Master anticipating the punchline, speaking it with his accent, and laughing so much, Swami said that you really had no idea what he had said, but you were so caught up in the sea of mirth that that you'd become the end point of the whole mystical experience, a tiny bubble of laughter in Master's presence, becoming the sea of mirth itself. What a glorious destiny. God bless you.